So alleged Russian hacking of the election is all over the news. How worried should we be that that's what actually happened?
So my whole approach to the Russia thing has been this quote from Catch-22, which is like, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean that they aren't after you. Or they aren't out to get you. And it seems like there has been a lot of like wild reporting and very simplistic reporting, but that doesn't mean that there isn't like real kernels of truth.
So there was this report yesterday the Russian Ministry of Defense put out, right, that the U.S. coalition had participated in airstrikes, anti-ISIS airstrikes, right, first of their kind, and then of course the Pentagon comes back and says, no, that's absolutely untrue. But I'm wondering if you think that we could see future cooperation between the two governments in the anti-ISIS war?
I think that if with this administration, certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems to be Trump's priority beyond, however deep his relationship with Russia and Russian officials or Russian businessmen or whatever goes. It does seem like he wants to have a realignment, and that his number one priority isn't necessarily, like justice in Syria.
Yeah.
It's, killing Islamic terrorists. And if the Russians can convince him that that's what they're doing, then yeah, I think you can totally see that kind of alignment.
How do Russians feel about Putin? Are there decidedly different camps? Does he represent some sort of a welcome break for enough people that they've put their faith in him? Like, how does he stand in the body politic there relative to what Trump is to us?
It's really similar to what you have in the U.S., where you have a fairly large number of people who really welcome Putin, welcomed him when he came in and welcome him now. He's a break from like a chaotic past, drunk Yeltsin. He's someone who represents law and order, and who represents Christian values. Like, there's definitely a faction of the population, a pretty large part, that believes that, just like with Trump. Then you have, what is kind of the catch-all phrase is opposition or oppositionally minded people who look for, independent sources of information, who believe in things like human rights, who believe in things like freedom of the press, the freedom to protest, and they certainly don't support Putin. It's not unlike the situation we have here.
What happens if the bromance ends between Putin and Trump?
Well, that's the interesting thing, is like, it's going to be interesting to watch how does Russia exist without having the U.S. as an enemy. For so long, Russia's been able to say, like, evil America is screwing with our elections and with our politics and whatever, and now that that doesn't exist, what are they going to do? We're seeing, like, this hints of an interesting realignment in Russia where they're now starting to put the blame on like the deep state in the U.S. and saying that really, it's like the spy agencies in the U.S. that are looking to undermine Trump. So, maybe that's what
you raised something that I think hasn't been talked about enough, the discussion about potential Russian interference in our election. Some people, particularly on the left here, have said, well, don't we do that all the time? And obviously Putin has mentioned that as being one of his complaints, that we go in to observe elections, but in fact we're kind of meddling with them or delegitimizing regimes after they're elected democratically. Is there any legitimacy to that complaint on his part?
I think there's a lot of ways to answer that, but for me, the most important thing is just because the U.S. does it doesn't make it okay. And if we're critical of the U.S. doing it, doesn't mean that we should say, well, then it's fine for other nations to do it. We should hold our government to account and other governments to account.
Do you believe it? Do you believe the accusations in general?
I mean, Miriam could answer this question better than I can because I'm in no way a Russia expert, but anything could be possible at this point, right? Like, look at where we are right now. Who knows? I don't know.
What do you think?
Putting aside the question of hacking and stuff like that, as someone who follows Russian politics and Russian media and Russian like troll campaigns and all that stuff, and have been since well before like the election campaign even took off, you did see like a lot. The Russian government definitely came down on one side, and they wanted a certain outcome. And I think actually like the outcome wasn't necessarily the election of Donald Trump. It was just like pure and utter chaos, and they kind of got that.
So one question I have, and others have too, is we have this massive intelligence apparatus, which ideally is supposed to tell us about things before they happen or when they're happening, but it seems to be telling us about this after it happened. So why weren't we able to stop it? Do we have the capability to stop this kind of thing while it's happening so it doesn't actually like mess up an election?
I mean, it's a totally valid question. We don't know the ins and outs of why why we didn't know this earlier, right? But we run up against this sort of problem all the time when there's a terrorist attack, anywhere, or particularly when it happens in the U.S. We're like, well, how come this bloated, massive intelligence apparatus that collects all of this information didn't see this coming? The fact is that it's not an all-knowing entity. Like, these are institutions made up of human beings, and they have their politics and they have their problems, and sometimes we just don't get it. We miss things for whatever reason. So I don't know I want to know what the story is, but I think that there is a sort of misunderstanding about the way that these agencies work, and people expect us to know everything.
I think it's really important for the truth to come out in and of itself, and then what various government bodies want to do with that information is their business. But I really want to learn not just what the Russians were doing in terms of hacking and leaking to WikiLeaks and getting all this information out there, but really the relationships between various members of the Trump administration and Russia. And as for what can be done, I mean, I think it's not just the United States. There's a host of really, really important elections coming in Europe: France, Germany, the Netherlands. They're already starting to see signs of the influence campaign that we saw here. And so anything we can do to bring it to light can also maybe prevent it from happening in other countries.
Probably important not to lose sight of all of the other factors that domestically that contributed to the election going the way that it went. Right? We don't want to be singularly focused on this idea that the Russians put him in power 100%.
Right.
We have to remember that a lot of things came together to bring us where we are right now.